we go. And we're up and
Perfect.
running. The man of the hour, Mr. Terry Tucker. First question: have you ever considered a job in like media broadcasting? I can imagine a guy, doing interviews on the street, and we're back to Terry Tucker in the studio.
No, I think the closest I came to that when I was in college, and you'd get interviewed after games and stuff like that, or for the newspaper. That was as close as I came. And I hate to admit this, that was 40 years ago. So.
Goodness gracious, man. That's wow. Well, yeah, I did a little bit of perusing on LinkedIn. So you went to the Citadel, right?
I did.
So the only thing I know about the Citadel is I'll see like a little college football. It'll be like Citadel's playing Alabama this week, and I just know that the final score is going to be 78-6. That's all I know about the Citadel. It's my entire sphere of knowledge.
It's all about the money. You get a good take when you play Alabama. So
That's a good point. Yeah, I love it. Well, folks, just for the folks at home, we're mixing it up a little bit. We got Mr. Terry Tucker on the show. I've been interviewing a few buddies. I got introduced to you by Mr. Montgomery. So this is cool. This is one of the first podcasts, Dawgcasts, where it's not with like a close buddy. It's through an introduction, a referral. So I think that's pretty cool. I saw you've been on 500 podcasts. I think I saw.
Probably close to 700 by now.
Ooh-wee. Well, what kind of started your journey? Because I really read through your bio and your background, and you're an author and a speaker and podcast. I mean, you're doing stuff that I aspire to do, man. And like, what kicked off this journey of yours? Because I saw previously you were a police officer, and I'd love to know a little more about your story.
Yeah. I mean, from starting with podcasting, I started a speaking business just as COVID hit, and like so many other businesses, had to figure out how to retool and deliver your service in a different way. And somebody reached out to me and said, "Would you like to be a guest on my podcast?" And I said, "Sure." What's a podcast? And I did. I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And we kind of record a discussion and then we put it on social media. And I'm like, okay. Honestly, I had literally Post-it notes all around the camera. They would ask a question, Brady, I would lean in and I'd read the Post-it note. I was terrible. It was horrible. It was absolutely lousy. But a funny story. Probably about 8 months ago, I did a podcast with a gentleman who is a former NFL player. This guy's like 6'6", like 340 pounds, huge guy, makes it to the pinnacle of professional sports. And we were talking afterwards, and he said, Terry, when I started my podcast, I didn't think anybody listened to me because I didn't think anybody would care what I had to say. And I'm like, Marcus, I mean, you made it to the pinnacle of sports. How could you possibly not think anybody? And his brother's in the National Football League Hall of Fame. I'm like, how could you possibly not think? But that just goes to show you that, even I don't care how successful, how important, how influential you are, there's always that. And I hate the word imposter syndrome. I guess, imposter syndrome. But it's like, why would you not think that your life, your experience, your story is valuable in some way? So that started me on my podcast journey. And like I said, I'm probably closing in at about 700 podcasts with people all over the world.
Love it, man. So did you start off? So you started off with like someone that reached out to you. How many episodes did you get through before you were like, all right, I'm starting to kind of figure this out? I mean, were the first 10 just garbage, or what was the progression like?
Yeah, it's funny because I had a discussion with my publisher, and I said, Scott, I listen to every podcast I've ever been on. I want to be a good guest. I want to have tighter stories. I count how many times I say or huh or whatever. I want to be better. And he's like, no, Terry. He said, it's not about being good. It's just about not sucking. And I said, well, thanks for the title of my next book, Just Don't Suck, But I said, no, that's not what it's about. I want to be good at it. And I was. I mean, when I first started out, I was terrible. I didn't have good stories. And I think in this venue, stories are real important. I mean, talking about yourself is one thing, but having stories that either illustrate that from something you did or from something somebody else did, something you learned or something like that. That's how we're made up. Our brains are designed to take in stories, and we get that. And okay, there's a point to this story. There's something I want to learn, something I want to get from it. And so I try to have better stories and things like that. So I constantly read. And so it's like, oh, that's a great story. I'm going to use that and things like that. So yeah, it really was, the more I did, the better I got. I still have a long way to go, but I love doing them, and I love meeting the people that I meet. Because I mean, I've done podcasts with people in China and Hong Kong and New Zealand and Africa, and so it's just amazing, especially for me. I'm very fortunate and I'm very lucky to have done the things I've done in my life and have the things I have. And when you interview some guy, who's interviewing you in Africa, literally, with the Sahara in the background and stuff like that, the guy doesn't know where his next drink of water is going to come from. You really appreciate what you have, especially here in the US.
Oh my goodness, man. I think that's fantastic. Well, man, you just said a lot right there. That's fantastic. Well, I love what you said about imposter syndrome, though. It's because I feel like that's kind of like the new buzzword or buzzwords. Like, I think before it was imposter syndrome, the famous word was like toxic, and now we've kind of moved on. It's like there seems to be buzzwords that just pop up and stick around for a while. But I was listening to an Eric Thomas video the other day, and he said something that really stuck with me, because I've occasionally struggled with a little bit of negative self-talk and, who the hell are you to do this, that, and the other. And he said something. He was like, people need to hear what I'm saying. And it might not be for everybody, but someone out there needs to hear this. And something clicked in my head on the drive. I'm like, that's so spot on. It's like, someone somewhere is going to draw inspiration from you. And it might not be the entire message. It might be a line of dialogue. It might be the tone of the message. It might be anything. But I feel almost guilty not doing what I'm doing right now. But it's taken me some time to kind of get over that hump. I mean, so with you started in 2020. And I love that he said that, because it's that magic 3-year period I keep hearing about. The amount of people where they're like, I started during COVID and now it's 2023 and they popped. Or they started in 17 and they popped in 2020. Like, so what was the progression from, if you'd never been on a podcast before that point, how have you gotten to speaking and authoring a book? And like, what started that, I guess?
I guess my life, and really for the last 11 years, I've been dealing with battling a rare form of cancer, a rare form of melanoma. Most people think of melanoma as too much exposure to the sun, and it affects the melan, the pigment in your skin. My form of melanoma has nothing to do with exposure to the sun. It's a rare form that appears on the bottom of the hand, or the bottom of the hands, the bottom of the feet, or the palms of the hands. And so 2012, I had my own company, and I'm also coaching girls high school basketball. And I had this callus break open on the bottom of my foot, right below my third toe. And I don't think much of it, because as a coach, you're on your feet a lot. But after a few weeks of it not healing, I went to see a podiatrist, a foot doctor friend of mine, and took an x-ray. And he said, Terry, I think you have a cyst in there and I can cut it out. And he did. And he showed it to me. It was just a little gelatin sac with some white fat in it, no dark spots, no blood, nothing that gave either one of us concern. But fortunately or unfortunately, he sent it off to pathology to have it looked at. And then 2 weeks later, I get the call from him. And as I said, he's a friend of mine. And the more difficulty he's having explaining to me what's going on, the more frightened I'm becoming, until finally he just laid it out for me. He said, Terry, I've been a doctor for 25 years. I have never seen the form of cancer that you have. And he recommended I go to MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston. And so I did. And that started my 11-year journey. I had my foot amputated 2018. I had my leg amputated in 2020 during the middle of the COVID pandemic. And so all of that has gotten me to, I need a purpose. I have to have something to do. I remember when I graduated from college, my father was dying. And he had end-stage breast cancer back in the 1980s, and they didn't know how to treat a man with breast cancer. So they pretty much told him to go home and die. But he lived another 3.5 years. And I believe he did because he had a purpose. He was in real estate. And he actually worked up till 2 weeks before he died. And I sort of tucked that in the back of my mind and said, well, when it's my time, I'm going to have to consider that. So what was I going to do? Here it was COVID. I have tumors in my lungs. I've just lost my leg. I'm sure as heck not going to be around people. How can I deliver my message? How can I get the word out of my experience and what I've learned? And podcasting just seemed to be the way to go. And now that things have opened up, I'm able to speak more either virtually or in person. So it's just kind of, as it's really kind of unfolded as I've just let it. I didn't try to force it. And so when I have treatments, and I'm treated every 3 weeks for an entire week at the hospital for the tumors I still have in my lungs, and then I have 2 weeks off. And during those 2 weeks, I am guests on podcasts like yours, and it gives me something to do instead of sit around and say, gee, I'm probably going to die, which I probably am. But you know what? Maybe not today. So what can I do to make today positive?
My goodness, man. I mean, that's such an unbelievable, because I'm a big believer in the power of the mind. And, I think when you get a diagnosis like that, I think a lot of people would naturally gravitate towards, oh, woe is me. This is it. This is the end. This is it. I mean, what? Because clearly, man, I mean, you sound pretty positive amongst all this. I mean, oh, yeah, I've got tumors in my lungs. I have to go get treated for a week. I got 2 weeks. I'll do some fun. Like, that's not a normal mindset that someone in your position would have. How did you adopt that mentality?
I think it's something that I learned from sports. I started playing basketball when I was 9 years old, and I played all the way up. I went to the Citadel on a basketball scholarship until I graduated. So when I was 21, and I think what I learned from team sports, and I think it can be whatever team you're on. We're all part of a team, whether it's a family or a group that you work with, whatever it ends up being. What I learned from team sports is the importance of being part of something that's bigger than yourself. You realize on a team that if you don't do your job, not only do you let yourself down, but you let your teammates down, your coaches down, your fans down, your parents down, etc. And if you think about it, the biggest team game that we all play is this game of life. And I'm on a clinical trial drug now that, like I said, more than likely is not going to save my life. It's kept my tumors stable in my lungs, but they're still there. But the way I look at it is the reason I go every 3 weeks, and I've been doing this for almost 3 years now, is because maybe it's going to save the life of somebody 5 years from now or 10 years from now, based on the data that the doctors are gleaning from my blood tests and my scans and things like that. And to me, that's just being part of something that's bigger than yourself.
I was just about to say, I mean, being part of something bigger than yourself has this power to just draw greatness out of people. And I tell you what, man, I don't know a ton about you yet, but I mean that is admirable as all hell to someone who does not have cancer that I know of. I don't know, but also with melanoma, I've got a unique connection with that. It runs in my mom. I mean, my goodness, she probably has had 15 plus like little freckles or moles, cut out of her. I remember one day she picked me up from daycare after school, and they had taken one out of her scalp, and she was like, I could still see the tears in her eyes because she was just in so much pain. And but when I think of melanoma, that's what I think. I think I've got to be careful, stay out of the sun, make sure I put sunscreen on, all that. But so how rare is this? It's completely outside of what I think of when I think of that word.
It's incredibly rare. As a matter of fact, 11 years that I've been doing this, I only know one other person who has my kind of melanoma, and I just recently met him. He lives in Oregon, and he's much earlier in the phase of than I am. I mean, he's been at it a couple of years, and so there's the form of melanoma that we have. And then there's an even rarer form of melanoma that appears in your mucous membranes. So in your nose or your mouth or your anus or something like that, and it's still melanoma. And so, but those are incredibly rare. I mean, maybe in the United States, I don't know what the numbers are, so I don't want to put it out there, but maybe a few thousand people every year that get this form of the disease. It's just incredibly rare. It has nothing to do with the sun. And I'll tell you kind of a funny story. When I was young, and we had acne, our parents would take us to the dermatologist, and they would put us under a sun lamp they would expose us to ultraviolet rays to dry out the pimples and things like that. And you look back now, it's like that was the worst thing you could have done. But that was science back in the 1970s.
It's funny you say that because I remember I've heard stories of my grandma back in like the 70s and the 80s. Like she would go out to the dock and they would slather themselves. I don't know if it was vegetable oil or what, but they're literally frying like
baby oil. Baby oil. Yeah, we used to use baby oil.
It's like, what the hell? That's wild. But I mean, back then they had no idea. You know what I mean?
No.
But wow, what does I love your openness to talk about the cancers. What does a week worth of treatment look like? Because I know with like kidney stuff, there's dialysis machines. Like what do they put you through for a week of skin cancer or a form of?
So again, I'm on this clinical trial drug, which means it's not approved by the FDA, so it's not available to other people. I started on this drug with two other people. I'm treated at the University of Colorado hospitals. Started on with two other people. I'm the only one left. The other two have passed away. And so basically what this drug does is the way cancer proliferates in the body is that it secretes an enzyme or a protein that hides itself from your immune system. And what this drug does is it takes away that protein or that enzyme so that my own immune system can say, oh, wait a minute, just like a cold or a flu virus, that doesn't belong here. We should go, yeah, exactly. We should go take it out. But the problem I have, so Monday, up at 4 a.m, at the hospital by 6, blood work, see the doctor, approved for treatment, and then I get an IV that hopefully will stay all week, and then I get this drug. And about 2 hours after I get the drug, I have a very violent reaction. I shake terribly. I am nauseous. I throw up. I have a headache. And that's every single day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And then I get 2 weeks off. And I do this during those 2 weeks. And my wife and I have an occasional disagreement. We've been married for 30 years. So an occasional disagreement that's like, look, you need to rest. You need to, bring your blood counts back up and things like that. And my running joke is I get plenty of rest when I'm dead. This is something that gives me energy. This is something that gives me purpose. And so doing it is something I love to do and I want to do. And sometimes I'll do 3 or 4 podcasts in a day. And like I said, I could be exhausted when I start them, but it gives me energy. So I will say right now, thank you for the opportunity to be on your show today.
Well, I tell you, I mean, this show, I'm sure you've been on some more prolific podcasts, but this episode will probably get a solid 12 views in the first 24 hours. But
that's 12 more than I had this morning. So,
there you go, man. And that's the way I look at it. The way I look at it is I'm not an expert at this. And I kind of had that when I was brand new at this. I'm like, I don't know if the world needs another white guy in his 20s with a microphone. I mean, there's everyone and their mother has a freaking podcast. You know what I mean? But I started having fun, and I'm like, you don't have to be an expert to do this. You just have to have a computer, and you just have to know how to communicate. If we're just having a conversation, you know what I mean? I get a lot of enjoyment from doing it. I love taking the little clips out and sharing that because there's value in this dialogue. Oh man, what when you got the original diagnosis or through these ongoing conversations you're having with medical professionals and all that, like what was the prognosis that they've given you? Like, is there a timeline or what does that look like?
So initially the prognosis was this is a death sentence because at the time they had nothing to offer me for melanoma other than surgery. So if it's someplace where we can cut it out, we'll go in and cut it out. But if it's someplace we can't, sorry. So my wife and I, we were just talking about this story the other day. She said, my wife and I were meeting with my oncologist at MD Anderson, and she asked to talk to my wife, and I hated this, outside my purview. She's like, can I talk to you out in the hall? And she said to my wife, she said, he's probably not going to live another 2 years. Is he going to be okay with that? And she kind of got this smirk on her face and said, you have no idea who you're dealing with. You go tell him that and see what he does. And it's funny because every April, which is when I was initially diagnosed, I get a letter from the University of Texas, MD Anderson Cancer Hospital, from their tumor board, which basically says, we're still doing research, we're still following you. Circle one of these three. You're alive with cancer, you're alive without cancer, or you're dead. Now I keep hanging around because I haven't figured out how to circle number 3, so that's not true. I do get the letter, but number 3 doesn't really say, are you dead? But it does say, are you alive with cancer? Are you alive without cancer? Or it says other. Like, well, other's got to mean you're dead. So it's one or the other. And it's just, it was, you're going to die. And I'm like, okay, if I'm going to die, that's fine. And there's been so many opportunities along the way. When I found out I had the tumors in my lungs and I was going to have my leg amputated, I had a CAT scan to determine that. And then about 8 months later, my oncologist showed me the results of that CAT scan. And I have no medical background. I don't know how to read a CAT scan, but you can kind of look at it and be like, boy, that sure doesn't look like it's supposed to be there on the scan. I had these big tumors in my lungs. I had fluid all around the pleural spaces on the outside of my lungs. And I remember looking at my oncologist and saying, how was I alive? And he kind of got this grin on his face and sort of shook his head and was like, I don't know, because you shouldn't have been. Which said to me, and Brady, I have a very strong faith, which said to me, God's not done with me yet. When I die, where I die, how I die, way above my pay grade. Don't spend a lot of time worrying about that. Spend more time worrying about how I'm going to live my life to the best way I possibly can.
Well, I'd have to imagine something like having a strong faith probably has played a tremendous role in your attitude throughout the process as well. I think, what is it? The indomitable human spirit. I think about Les Brown as you're kind of telling this story, and when he got his diagnosis back in the day and all that, I think of that line, like, someone else's opinion of you does not have to dictate your reality. And I kind of think of, like, when a doctor gives you, I've heard so many stories of a doctor says, you've got 2 years, you've got 6 years, you've got 10, you've got whatever. And then the guy or girl lives on for another 30, 40 years. Like, I'm a firm believer that, I don't know how it works. I don't know how the brain works and how the body does this, but if a person believes that they're going to get through it and they've got the right attitude and they're doing the right things physically to, check all the boxes, I think anyone can get through anything, really. But
I do too. Just like people die when they're ready to die. Not on some timetable that a doctor gives you. And I've always said, doctors play the odds. I mean, they're like Vegas. They tell you what the research says, but what the doctors don't know is your 40-year class reunion's coming up, or your granddaughter's getting married, or your son's getting married, or something like that. And by God, you're going to be there for that. And if you have that will, you have that spirit, you can outlast the predictions. But again, I think it comes back to purpose. You've got to have something to do, because if you don't, those demons of doubt will take over your mind. You will sit there and like, oh, well, they gave me 2 years. I'm going to be dead in 2 years. And I've seen people do that. I've seen people take what the doctor says is gospel and bang, they're dead in 2 years. And it was like, did you? And maybe they did. Maybe it was so bad. I mean, I have a friend of mine who has pancreatic cancer and has had it for a while now. And it's pancreatic cancer used to be, you'll be dead in a couple months. There's no way we can do anything for it. But technology, science is evolving. We're becoming more. They're even to the point now where they're doing research on vaccines. So they will take, for example, if you had cancer, say you had lung cancer, they would take a piece of your tumor, they would develop a vaccine that is specific for your genetic makeup, and then they would give you that vaccine in the hope of curing you. It wouldn't work for me because I don't have the same genetic makeup you do. But that's how far we're advancing. We're not there yet, but it's amazing the things, like I said, 11 years ago, melanoma was a death sentence. Today, it's, I'm on this clinical trial drug. I mean, I've had certainly surgeries. When I was initially diagnosed, my doctor, like I said, there was nothing to give me. So she put me on this drug called interferon, which is a lot of times given to people who have hepatitis in their liver and things like that, basically to kick the can down the road. The side effects of the interferon were that I had severe flu-like symptoms for 2 to 3 days every week after each injection. And I took those weekly injections for 5 years. So imagine having the flu. And I'm not talking about, oh, I don't feel good. I'm talking about I'm throwing up, I've got diarrhea, I ache, I have a headache. It was a lousy case of the flu every week for 5 years. And that wasn't a cure. That was, we're just trying to buy you some more time. So this is all a mind game. It's absolutely a body game as well, but it is absolutely a mind game as well.
My goodness, man. I mean, what are some, because I always love to ask folks about lessons they've learned on their journey. Because I was always curious because it's your LinkedIn said you'd spent a healthy amount of time as a police officer. And I was kind of curious how you found yourself in that profession, lessons you've learned. We can cover that in a second. Like throughout this whole process of diagnosis to where you are right now, like what would you say like one of the biggest lessons that you've pulled from this experience is?
I think that we quit, we give up. And it's not just physical ailments. I think it's, I've seen people start down the road toward a goal, whatever that, you want to start a business, whatever that, you want to write a book. And they butt up against an impediment. Something gets in their way and they can't get over it. They can't get around it. They can't get through it. And so they quit. But we don't just quit. We got to blame somebody. We got to blame our parents or our station in life or our boss. We've got to blame somebody for it. And I remember when I got cancer, where people were like, well, who do you blame? I'm like, what do you mean, who do I blame? Well, you got cancer. You must, is it your parents? And kind of an aside, I had all 88 genes that doctors either know of or suspect cause every form of cancer that we know about, tested about 3 years ago. And I have absolutely no mutations in any of my genes, which certainly begs the question, then why did I get this incredibly rare form of cancer? Nobody can tell me that. So I don't spend a lot of time, worrying about it. I got it. And so people, they quit, they give up, and then they want to blame people. And then when they found out I had a faith life, it was like, well, you must blame God. And I'm like, no, I don't think God got up on a Tuesday morning, checked his to-do list and said, Terry Tucker cancer today. I don't think that happened at all. But there was a time when I was on those interferon treatments where I felt there was sort of two camps. There was people that are living and people like me who were just not dying. And I literally begged God, I was like, just take me. I'm not productive. I'm not doing anything. Take me out of this. Obviously he didn't, but I think he gave me the strength to get through this. And let me end with this story. Back in the 1950s, this true story, there was a doctor at Johns Hopkins University who did an experiment with rats. And he took rats and he put them in a tank of water that was over their head. And he wanted to see how long the average rat could tread water. And the average rat treaded water for about 15 minutes. And just as those rats were getting ready to sink and drown, he reached in, grabbed them, pulled them out, dried them off, and let them rest for a while. And then he took the exact same rats and put them back in that exact same tank of water. And the second time around, on average, those rats treaded water for 60 hours. Now think about that. The first time, 15 minutes. You're just not going to fail. Your business isn't going to go under. You're going to die. Your life is over. The second time around, 60 hours, which taught me two things. Number one, the importance of hope in our lives, that maybe not today, maybe not next month, maybe not even this year. But if you keep doing the things that you're doing that you know will get you to your goal, it'll eventually happen. You have to have that hope. And the second thing it taught me was just how much more our physical bodies can handle than we ever give ourselves credit for. We quit, we give up, we give in long before our body does. And I think part of that is going back to what we were talking about earlier. If you can't control your brain is going to control your body. So if you can't get on top of it, then those demons of doubt are going to come in and eventually you're going to lose the battle.
Thank goodness, man. Well, I think that's yeah, I love that. What is that? A 240x difference, 15 minutes to 60. I mean, that's unbelievable. We've got about 9 more minutes until Zoom boots us off. But let's talk about your book, by the way. So I mean, that's a place where I aspire to be one day. So what's the book about? I don't even know what questions to ask in relation to it, but let's just talk about the book.
The book's called Sustainable Excellence, the 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life. It was really a book born out of 2 conversations I had. One was with a former player that I had coached in high school who had moved to the area in Colorado where my wife and I live. and with her fiance, and the four of us had dinner one night. And I remember saying to her after dinner, I'm really excited that you're living close and I can watch you find and live your purpose. She got real quiet for a while, and then she looked at me and she said, well, Coach, what do you think my purpose is? I said, I have absolutely no idea what your purpose is, but that's what your life should be about. Finding the reason you were put on the face of this earth, using your unique gifts and talents, and living that purpose. And then the second conversation was with a young man from college who reached out and said, what do you think are the most important things I should learn to not just be successful in my job or in business, but to be successful in life? And Brady, I didn't want to give him the, get up early, work hard, help others. I didn't want to give him that. I wanted to see if I could go deeper. So eventually, took some notes and had these kind of 10 principles. And so I sent them to him. And then I stepped back and it was like, I got a life story that fits underneath that principle, or I know somebody whose life emulates this principle. So literally during the 3 to 4 month period while I was healing after I had my leg amputated, I sat down at the computer every day and I built stories, and they're real stories about real people underneath each of the principles. And that's how sustainable excellence came to be.
Goodness. Well, I'd love to buy a copy if you ship out to South Florida after this. I'd love to give it a read and support you in that sense. But I mean, that's fantastic. Very rarely am I kind of lost at I'm not lost for words, but my goodness, man, it's like I woke up today, and every time I wake up, I right above me, I learned this from Bradley, and I wrote on a piece of paper as soon as I opened my eyes, says, congratulations, bitch, you got another day, and it just reminds me, that, I like to say thank you before I go to sleep, and thank you when I wake up. I learned that from David Meltzer. But like the little tiny issues that I've ran into today, where maybe it's a negative YouTube comment, or maybe this person doesn't reply to it. It's like, what the heck? It just means nothing in the grand scheme of things in this conversation with you. It's like, it just puts things into perspective. And I think I really appreciate you sharing your story. I love that. Uncommon, because the common person would get a diagnosis and they would fold like a cheap suit and it'd be over. The fact that you are your downtime trying to inspire folks and speaking at, I have almost an immeasurable amount of admiration for that. I know people who are going to listen to this, they will too. And like you said, it might be 12 people, it might be 14 people, but it will have an impact on people. And I think that's fantastic. My goodness. I guess we got about 6 minutes left. I mean, if we wanted to touch a little on the police, I'm sure you maybe have a cool story in that world. And I just have one last questions after that, for the most part.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you look at my resume, my first 2 jobs out of college were in business. I was in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain, and their marketing department. And then I was in hospital administration. And then I made that major pivot in my life. And the reason, there is a backstory. I mean, my resume, I always said, looks like a Super Ball went off, in somebody's room, it's just bouncing all over the place. My grandfather was a Chicago police officer from 1924 to 1954. So was in law enforcement during Prohibition, when alcohol was outlawed in the United States, during the Great Depression in the late 1920s, early 1930s. And then when the gangs, Al Capone and those guys, were shooting up the town. And he was actually shot in the line of duty with his own gun. It was not a serious injury, was shot in the ankle. But my dad, who was an infant at the time, always remembered the knock on the door, the stories my grandmother told of, that knock on the door, Mrs. Tucker, grab your son, come with us, your husband's been shot. So when I expressed an interest in going into law enforcement, my dad was absolutely not. You're going to college, you're going to major in business, get out, get a great job, get married, have 2.4
accounting. We're going to put you in accounting or something with spreadsheets, not guns.
That's right.
Yeah.
You might get a paper cut, but by God, you're not going to get shot. So, I had a choice when my father, when I graduated from college, my father was dying of cancer. I could have said, sorry, Dad, I'm going to go blaze my own trail and do my own thing. Or out of love and respect for you, I will do what you want me to do. Understanding that backstory, now my resume looks a little bit more, makes a little more sense, because that's what I did. I went into business, and I sort of joke, I did what every good son did, waited till my father passed away, and then I followed my own dreams. So got to do that, was a hostage negotiator on the SWAT team, which was an absolute blast, and was able to train for a period of time with the FBI's hostage negotiation team and stuff. So I absolutely loved it. I would do it again. I know that's not a good thing to say in today's society. Everybody hates the police, but we did good work and we tried to help a lot of people along the way.
There's definitely a joke written in one of those lines. You were a hostage negotiator with SWAT. It was a real blast. I'm like, I don't think there's any bombs or hostages. A blast might not be a good thing if you're in that situation. But
we used a few flashbangs. That was no problem, you know.
My gosh, man, that's it seems like you've had a life well lived up to this point, from the sounds of it. That's fantastic. Well, I tell you what, Terry, what's the if you could, I don't know, if you can go back to, you know, it's that cheesy cliched question, if you can go back and talk to your younger self and all that stuff, though, right? But like, genuinely, I mean, you've been in coaching, you've been in all sorts of different industries, you've got a wide sphere of different experiences and influences. Like, for someone who's maybe on the younger side, maybe they're bright-eyed and they're confused, they've got a lot of options in front of them, maybe they're a little directionless, they're a little lost. I've been there for sure. Like, what's just the one thing, if you could impart a piece of wisdom onto someone, given everything you've learned, like, what is that thing for you?
Yeah, I'm trying to decide which story I want to tell you. I think I'll tell you this one just for the sake of time. I had a nurse recently ask me what it was like to have my foot amputated, and in 2018, my leg amputated in 2020. I told her, it certainly has not been easy. And, you know, I'm 6'8" tall. So learning to walk again, falling is not an option. You get hurt when you fall from this height. So, but what I did tell her was, cancer can take all my physical faculties, but cancer can't touch my mind. It can't touch my heart, and it can't touch my soul. And that's who I am. That's who you are, Brady. That's who everybody who's listening to us is. And we spend a lot of time working on this body. You know, we go to the gym, we eat right, we get enough rest, drink enough water, we do all that stuff. And I'm not telling you not to do that. You absolutely should do that. But what I am suggesting is maybe spend a little more time every day working on who you really are, your heart, your mind, and your soul. This body's going to die. We all know that. It's going to decay. It's going to go away. But your heart, your mind, your soul, who you really are, those things are eternal. And I don't think we spend nearly as much time working on those things as we should.
I love that. I always like to. I don't want to brand myself as the "you're gonna die" guy, but I do. I think mortality is something that, as a society, and it's different from society to society, but for American society, it's something it's so taboo. We don't talk about it. We try to ignore it. We do as much as we can to run away from it. But it's like, none of us make it out of this thing alive, man. All of us are going to get our ticket punched at some point, and we will become food for the worms, fart in the wind on a floating rock in the middle of nowhere, you know? I think you and I are of a similar mindset, in the sense of, we're trying to impact as many people as we can before we do that. We're trying to live a life as best lived as possible before that time comes. And man, what a great conversation we had today, man. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. And yeah, and I tell you what, do you have a podcast? We got less than 60 seconds, but where can the folks find you? Plug yourself now with social media, website, email, whatever.
Yeah, I have a website. It's called Motivational Check. I put up a thought for the day every day. You can get access to my book. I have recommendations for other books to read, videos to watch, all of that. You can even leave me a message there. It's at motivationalcheck.com.
I love it. I love it. I love it. And whenever it says less than a minute, I don't know when it's going to kick me off. So I think we've covered as much as we can cover. If you've seen any of the other episodes, it usually just cuts off at the end and someone's in mid thought. But actually, you know what? I'll for the first time ever, I'll end it on my own accord. Where is it? Stop video. I don't even know. All right. I guess we're just going to ride this thing out. It'll boot me off here in a second. But other than that, yeah, I don't know. You got any thoughts?